Videos claiming Florida secretly released hundreds of honey badgers into the Everglades have racked up millions of views over the past year, complete with dramatic titles promising a wild predator showdown against invasive snakes. There is just one problem. It never happened. Honey badgers are native to Africa, the Middle East, and parts of India, and no government agency, state or federal, has ever captured, imported, or released a single one anywhere in Florida. What actually happened in the Everglades is a completely different story, one involving real hunters, real technology, and a real invasive predator crisis so severe that state wildlife officials have spent nearly a decade throwing everything they have at it, with results genuinely dramatic enough that nobody needed to invent a fake honey badger program to make the story interesting. The real predator at the center of this story is the Burmese python, a massive constrictor snake native to Southeast Asia that first began establishing itself in the Florida Everglades sometime around the late 1970s and early 1980s. Most researchers trace the population's origin to a combination of accidental and deliberate releases from the exotic pet trade, likely accelerated significantly when Hurricane Andrew destroyed a python breeding facility in South Florida in 1992, scattering an unknown number of animals directly into prime wetland habitat, a single catastrophic weather event that inadvertently supercharged what had likely already been a slow-growing, largely unnoticed population problem. Once established, Burmese pythons found almost nothing standing in their way. Florida's subtropical climate closely mirrors their native range. The Everglades offered an enormous, largely unpoliced wilderness to expand into, and the snakes arrived with no natural predators anywhere in the ecosystem prepared to keep their numbers in check. The ecological damage that followed has been catastrophic, and it is genuinely well documented through peer-reviewed research rather than speculation. A landmark study tracking mammal populations along Everglades roadways found that populations of raccoons had dropped by 99.3%, opossums by 98.9%, and bobcats by 87.5% in areas with established python populations compared to areas where pythons had not yet spread, while rabbits and foxes had become almost completely undetectable in the hardest-hit survey areas entirely. Researchers conducting that study relied on repeated nighttime road surveys across the same fixed routes over multiple years, comparing sighting frequencies before and after pythons became established in each specific survey zone, a methodology that allowed them to isolate the python's impact with far greater confidence than a single snapshot survey could ever have provided. Researchers now estimate that Burmese pythons have wiped out somewhere close to 99% of native small and medium-sized mammal populations across large stretches of the Everglades, a near-total ecological collapse cascading upward through the food chain, since those same mammals had long served as the primary prey base for native predators like the Florida panther, one of the most endangered mammals in North America, now competing directly with an invasive apex predator for an increasingly scarce food supply. Faced with a crisis this severe, Florida did not reach for anything resembling a fictional honey badger airdrop. Instead, the state built two parallel, professionally run python elimination programs, one operated by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission under a program called Patrick, the Python Action Team Removing Invasive Constrictors, and a second run by the South Florida Water Management District, both launched in 2017. These programs hire and pay contracted hunters directly to track down and remove pythons from public lands across South Florida, offering an hourly wage plus length-based bonuses that increase substantially for larger, harder-to-catch snakes. The results since these paid programs launched have been genuinely staggering compared to what came before them. Prior to 2017, python removal efforts recovered at best a few hundred snakes per year. Since the paid programs began, that number has jumped to somewhere between 1,600 and 3,600 pythons removed annually, with more than 2,500 total pythons removed from Florida's natural areas between 2000 and 2025. Over 11,000 of those captured specifically through the two paid elimination programs combined. If content grounded in real, verified wildlife science is exactly what you want more of on this channel, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to History's YT right now, because it genuinely helps more people find accurate stories instead of the fabricated wildlife content flooding this exact topic everywhere else. It is worth understanding just how quickly this crisis escalated once the python population found its footing, because the growth curve genuinely alarmed researchers tracking it in real time. Early sightings throughout the 1980s and 1990s were sporadic enough that some wildlife officials initially dismissed reports of an established breeding population as unlikely, assuming isolated escaped pets, rather than a self-sustaining wild population. That assumption collapsed once systematic surveys in the early 2000s began turning up python nests, juveniles, and clear evidence of successful reproduction spread across a rapidly expanding range throughout Everglades National Park and the surrounding water conservation areas. By the time state and federal agencies fully grasped the scale of what they were dealing with, the python population had already spread across thousands of square miles of wetland habitat. That is extraordinarily difficult for human hunters to access on foot, let alone systematically survey and clear. The scale of some individual captures involved in this program sounds almost as unbelievable as the fake honey badger videos, except every one of these is independently documented and verified. In 2019, a python hunter working with the state's Python Action Team captured an 18-foot 4-inch female Burmese python weighing just under 99 pounds at Big Cypress National Preserve, the largest python ever recorded in that specific preserve at the time. Records have continued falling in the years since. During the 2026 monthly elimination program competitions run by the South Florida Water Management District, one hunter, Bayo Hernandez, won a length-based bonus for capturing a python measuring 16 feet and half an inch long, while other top monthly performers across 2026 regularly eliminated between 15 and over 40 pythons each in a single month of dedicated hunting. Beyond individual paid hunters, Florida has also leaned heavily into an annual public event called the Florida Python Challenge, a 10-day competitive hunt open to both professional and novice participants, offering cash prizes for the most pythons captured and the longest single snake removed. The 2025 edition of the challenge set a new record, with participants removing nearly 300 Burmese pythons from designated competition zones across South Florida in just over a week, drawing hundreds of registered hunters from across the country eager to take part in what has become one of the most unusual and closely watched wildlife management events in the country. Strict rules govern the competition specifically to keep it safe and ecologically sound, including a complete ban on firearms during the hunt, a prohibition on using dogs or other trained animals to assist in tracking, mandatory online training for every registered participant, regardless of experience level, and severe penalties, including permanent disqualification for anyone who harms a native species or damages the nest of a protected animal during the search. The technology deployed alongside human hunters has grown increasingly sophisticated as the program has matured, reflecting just how seriously state officials have taken this crisis over the past several years. In December 2020, Florida's Wildlife Commission introduced its first detector dog team, a black Labrador and a pointer specifically trained to sniff out python scent trails through dense Everglades vegetation far faster than a human hunter working alone could ever manage on foot. A pairing that proved so effective at locating snakes hidden deep in thick brush that the program has since expanded its canine unit further. A 2023 Stat-E law expanded the toolkit further by explicitly authorizing state agencies to deploy drones in the ongoing hunt, giving hunters and researchers aerial surveillance capability across terrain that remains genuinely difficult and often dangerous for humans to navigate. Directly on the ground, particularly during the sweltering mosquito-heavy summer months, when much of the Everglades becomes nearly impassable on foot for anyone without specialized training and equipment. Researchers have also experimented with an approach nicknamed the Robo-Bunny, a mechanical decoy designed to mimic the movement and scent profile of small Everglades mammals, specifically to lure hidden pythons out of dense cover and into range where hunters or cameras can detect them. One of several increasingly creative technological workarounds researchers have developed specifically because traditional human tracking alone has repeatedly proven insufficient against a predator, this well camouflaged and this widely dispersed across such an enormous, largely inaccessible wetland ecosystem. Perhaps the most genuinely futuristic approach under active research and discussion involves attacking the python population at the reproductive level rather than relying purely on manual capture and removal. Scientists have explored the possibility of genetically modifying captured male pythons so that any offspring they produce would be exclusively male, then releasing those genetically altered males back into the wild population, specifically to gradually suppress future female births, and, over enough generations, meaningfully shrink the overall breeding population without requiring hunters to physically locate and remove every single individual snake scattered across the vast, often nearly impassable expanse of the Everglades ecosystem. This approach remains experimental and has not yet been deployed at scale, but it illustrates just how seriously wildlife researchers are treating a crisis that conventional manual hunting alone has proven unable to fully solve, even with thousands of pythons removed successfully every single year. None of this means Florida's python crisis is anywhere close to solved, and wildlife officials involved in these programs are consistently direct about that sobering reality. Female Burmese pythons can lay between 50 and 100 eggs in a single clutch, and the snakes themselves are notoriously difficult to detect, even for trained, experienced hunters, since their coloring blends remarkably well with the dense sawgrass and swamp vegetation covering most of the Everglades, meaning the total number of pythons actually removed each year likely represents only a small fraction of the true population still hidden throughout the ecosystem. Researchers estimate the total Burmese python population across South Florida may run into the tens of thousands, or potentially even higher, a number so large and so difficult to survey accurately across such dense remote terrain that wildlife officials openly acknowledge complete eradication may no longer be a realistic goal at all, with population suppression and long-term ecological damage control emerging instead as the more honest, achievable objective driving the state's ongoing investment in these programs. The public fascination with this crisis has also produced a genuinely unusual side effect, transforming python hunting from a purely governmental wildlife management effort into something closer to a recognized semi-professional pursuit with its own community, culture, and minor celebrity hunters who have built social media followings documenting their captures. Some of the state's most successful python removal agents have become recognizable figures within Florida's wildlife management circles specifically, regularly interviewed by local news outlets and invited to speak at public education events about invasive species awareness, a level of public engagement state officials have actively encouraged, correctly recognizing that sustained public interest translates directly into political support for continued program funding and occasionally into new volunteer hunters willing to undergo the required training and join the effort themselves. This entire episode also offers a genuinely useful lesson in how quickly fabricated online content can outpace and overshadow real, verified news, especially when the real story already involves genuinely dramatic elements ripe for exaggeration. The honey badger? Videos did not emerge from nowhere. They almost certainly drew inspiration from honey badgers' well-documented, entirely real reputation as one of the most fearless, aggressive small predators on the planet, an animal genuinely capable of killing venomous snakes and famous online for viral wildlife documentary footage, showing them shrugging off attacks that would incapacitate most other mammals their size. Taking that real reputation and grafting it onto Florida's very real python crisis produced a piece of content specifically engineered to feel plausible, dramatic, and shareable, exploiting genuine public awareness of Florida's snake problem to lend false credibility to an entirely invented solution that no wildlife agency ever proposed, funded, or implemented. What this real story ultimately demonstrates is considerably more impressive than any fabricated honey badger narrative could ever manage to be. Florida did not need to invent an imaginary predator to make this crisis dramatic, because the actual scale of ecological destruction, the genuinely record-setting individual captures, and the real technological arms race between wildlife officials and one of the most successful invasive species. Introductions in North American history already tells a story compelling enough to fill a documentary on its own. The honey badger videos flooding social media borrow the emotional shape of that real crisis, the mockery, the surprising outcome, the underdog predator narrative, and simply swap in a fictional animal because it makes for an easier, more shareable clip than explaining the genuinely complicated, ongoing, professionally coordinated effort Florida has actually built to fight this battle for real, one carefully documented GPS-tracked python removal at a time. Next time a video claiming Florida unleashed honey badgers, wolves, or any other imported predator into the Everglades shows up on your feed, the real story sitting right behind it is almost always more interesting than the fabricated version, precisely because reality rarely needs embellishment when the actual numbers, the actual captures, and the actual technology already sound this extraordinary on their own. Florida's real answer to its python crisis was never a single dramatic release event promising an overnight solution. It has been nearly a decade of steady, unglamorous, professionally coordinated effort, funded consistently, refined continuously, and documented meticulously, precisely the kind of story that rarely goes viral on its own merits, but absolutely deserves to be heard and understood correctly, especially by anyone who has already seen the fictional version circulating everywhere else,